a hotshot space guy who thinks he doesn't need anything to do what he needs to do.
A hotshot space guy who thinks he doesn't need anything to do what he needs to do. Hal, the Kroglobonians are different than us. They operate on a 3-day night cycle, so you can't expect them to to abide by our customs.
Those Kroglobonians are different than us. They operate on a 3-day night cycle, so you can't expect them to abide by our customs. Wow. I think that's enough of that.
That's a good one. That's a good one. Do we want to do another one or just scribble it?
Hello, and welcome to the 5th ever episode of Muprov Musings. I'm your host, Hal Munger, and joining me now is your other host, Julian Bernardo.
Hello, and welcome to Muprov Musings. This is a very, very special episode because we have a guest here. This guest, though, is somebody that, if you're really a keen listener, you should have known about this person from, well, the very first episode.
In fact, they've already appeared on this episode by the point that you're listening to that. Oh, well, I guess in the opening, but also in between the opening and now.
Yes, we are referring to the artist who created our opening number, See Me Now. Sebastian Blue, would you like to introduce yourself?
What's up? What's up? What's up? Hello, I'm Sebastian. I'm Blue Hawkman. I am a current musical improviser for the Stanford Improvisers. And I have been, teaching improv and musical improv. And I'm really into the idea of, taking music seriously as part of improv.
Yeah, and so we talked a little bit yesterday about genre, and that is going to be one of the big focuses of this episode. But since we have Sebastian here, and since music is a very big part of the improv that we all did together, we're going to spend some time here at the top just talking about how music and improv works. I know your troupe might look different than how our troupe looked, and we're going to share a little bit about the successes that we've had with music and improv.
Yeah, one thing that we were surprised when we went to bigger like improv festivals was that most of the other college groups we were running into did not have anyone who was musically improvising with them. Yeah, and we're not saying just for musical formats where you're singing. In all of our shows, we have 1, 2, or 3 improvisers who are improvising solely through music and sound effects. So we wanted to share this with you in hopes that, especially if you're on a college campus, this is also probably accessible to you. You can put out audition notice saying we're looking for musical improvisers and put it up on the music department of your college, and you will find people who are excited about it and want to try doing it, and it really adds to what you're doing.
And if you're not in college, I mean, it might be a little bit harder, but I'm sure you would be able to find people who play piano in the area. Sebastian, I'm sure you can talk to how hard it would be for someone who is just skilled with an instrument to start musically improvising. But if somebody is enthusiastic, then I'm sure it can be done.
Yeah, Sebastian, what would you say to someone who has never done musical improv, but is like musical improv curious and has instrument experience?
I mean, I think that even more important than instrument experience is improv experience. Mm-hmm. I think that almost any improviser, like great improviser that I know, could be a musical improviser, even if they don't know how to play an instrument, because you can kind of set a tone with just like, like, even if you're just playing like, I mean, obviously, if you know how notes work, that makes it better. But I think understanding what the people on stage are doing is the number one thing. And so,
and I'm going to butt in as Buddy Mick doesn't know doesn't know squat about anything. What do you mean, like music, like playing music when there's no singing going on? Like, wouldn't that be distracting to what's going on stage? Like, what do you even really mean by that?
Yeah. So, I mean, think about like almost any media that you consume, whether it's like movies or TV shows or like even plays. Most of the media that we have also has music as a strong element in it. So if you're watching a movie, something that's like one of the most important things in setting the tone for films and scenes in movies is the score. And what I'm doing essentially most of the time, and there's different things that happen based on the format, as you guys have talked about. But it's about kind of both helping the improvisers to set the tone that they're going for, and maybe even setting your own tone when it comes to, emotion or genre or themes. And that can get more advanced, as I think we'll talk about in a second. But yeah, like it's essentially doing the same thing that a composer would do on a movie, but
Yeah.
in real time.
Well, I think before we even get into theme, I think this interplay that you mentioned is really important to hit hard here. Like, yeah, what is the balance between the improvisers on stage giving a hit and you playing something that goes along to that versus hits that you give? I guess, like, what are cases where one might happen and cases where the other might happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, it depends on how well you know the group and how well they know you. If I'm in, so you guys have talked about a new play as part of this Muprov idea, and a big part of that was directly related to music. Like the whole tone of every single show was set by the musicians. So the musicians would play, kind of an overture, like an opening, out of nothing, like really just out of whatever we felt like doing in the moment. And that would ultimately be the hit for what the entire rest of the show would be like, which was a lot of responsibility, but it was kind of like a novel way of doing it in a way that I hadn't seen before. But in doing something like Hero's Journey, like we'll talk about, like we knew the genre and generally what themes were going to come up throughout. And if a player was setting the tone for a scene by saying like something about their family or something more melancholy, it would be easier to play something that went along with that as a support instead of making hits.
Yeah. I think before we move on, I don't know, Hal, if you wanted to interject, but we should talk about instruments and also number of musical improvisers, just as a very basic technical note of what instruments can you musical improvise with, what are harder and easier, and what do we have experience with?
Yeah, I think the one big person who's missing right now is Steven, partly because when we do combat as an episode, I really want to have Steven on. I haven't asked him yet. But Steven plays drums with our group, and he has greatly changed what we're able to do, especially in terms of stage combat. But also he has this slide whistle that he plays like whenever something kind of goofy or sad happens, and whenever something goofy or positive happens. And he's got a cranker that I don't know what those are called. I've asked him a bunch, but that he does for opening ratchet that he does for opening doors. And it can just add so much tension when there's like.
Yeah, I think like most broadly we would call Steven a percussionist. He plays drums, but also has all these other. I think you would consider those percussion, right, Sebastian? Little instruments to spice it up with.
But the energy is just way higher when he's
Me and Hal improvised for a long time with just a piano improviser. But once Steven joined the group, it was a huge difference of, it gives your scene some rhythm. There are movies that you can look at to think about this. The one that comes to mind right now is if you've seen Birdman. It came out a few years ago, or maybe like a decade or something, but that's a movie that like heavily features drums as part of the soundtrack. And it gives the dialogue a little bit of like a punch to it. Especially, I know we're talking about Muprov, but if you do find yourself doing a lot of like comedic scenes, I think that the drums do really help that as well.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many different ways of doing musical improv and in terms of instrumentation and stuff, like I've seen so many different things from just a violin to a band of like 9 to 10 people. Impro theater, I think in LA has like a huge band, and essentially it all comes down to the same things about listening and responding and someone taking the lead and knowing when to step up and when to step back, especially because it's a hard skill to like learn how to hear what someone else is playing and be able to know what notes they're playing and play along with it. But if like there is a jump in skill level, I think, required to go from 1 to 2 musical improvisers, and my recommendation is that piano is great. It's the most versatile. You can play percussively. You can play if you just have one. Piano is like the way to go. I mean, I say this as a pianist, but doing piano and drums is excellent too. Piano and drums and a single line instrument like a horn or a violin. Violin is such a great versatile instrument. I mean, it's kind of thinking about like how can you get the most out of your instrument, and if you can do that as a musician with any instrument, then that's great. The one instrument that I would recommend not doing, although I think some people do it, but is bass, because the bass notes are often taken care of by another instrument, and especially if I'm playing a bunch of chords that are going all over the place and I'm not telling anyone what those chords are, it's hard for a bassist to know the chords while I'm playing them. And so, yeah.
You say telling anyone what those chords are. You do have a method of kind of communicating with the other musical improvisers that you're playing with, right?
Sometimes, and sometimes it's just me going like just a little bit of a lead in so they know what note I'm going to, but it's often nonverbal, and the best musical improvisers I play with can get that.
But okay, I'm just trying to think, for not for Steven, but if you're playing with another person who's playing another like tonal instrument,
yeah,
you do have a computery thing set up, right?
Yeah, this is interesting. This is something I kind of did accidentally once, as the best things happen. If I'm playing guitar for a show, I'll plug into my computer, and there will be on the computer there is like a tuner that I have, and so I like tuned up before a show and I just left the tuner up accidentally. And then there was a moment where I was like playing chords during the show, and the person who was playing piano next to me was like looking at my computer, and the tuner was showing the chords that I was playing instead of the tuning notes, and I was like, whoa, this is super helpful. So now I do that for whenever that happens.
Yeah, so if you don't need to have perfect pitch if you have a
technological. That's right. Thank you for reminding me of that.
And then also, so yeah, especially you mentioned a 10-person band. You kind of are a 10-person band. What are you?
So if you have, again, all you need is one thing, and you can expand that however you want to. But I like bringing all my little toys, because it's like you have no idea if someone's going to pick up a mandolin during a show, and then you need a mandolin. And so, but this keyboard that I have has all these fun sounds that I can play strings and flutes. There's just so much in here. Bass, guitars, and sometimes like we've done a show. I think you guys mentioned this last week. About all the instruments and like it's fun for the players to like know what we are capable of and stretching us. So if someone says like, oh, I really wish someone had it's like a toy piano, like, oh, like this kid was playing a toy piano, and then you can go, And just like kind of the joint knowledge. It's like knowing that an improviser can do a backflip or something. And
Right.
do a flip.
Yeah.
So, but also, I play guitar and, acoustic guitar and electric guitar and, I can bring like a banjo or a mandolin, and in my computer, I can have all these presets for guitars. And I also, my favorite instrument, I have a theremin, which is a great, great instrument for some things and terrible for most. But it's great for setting the tone for, a sci-fi show or a horror show. And yeah, like it's been great to be able to work with different musicians, and like my rapport with different people is different in so many different ways, as it is with improvisers on stage. Mm-hmm. Like, what other people can do some more than others sometimes.
Yeah. And this has all been super informative and helpful, I think, probably to a general improv, like musical improv audience. But might I suggest we get into the Muprov of it a little bit, which I think, Sebastian, you said you wanted to talk a little bit about themes. And I think that themes are something that might be very like well utilized in the sort of Muprov setting. And I want to leave the floor for you.
Yeah. So thank you. I mean, like, this is one of my favorite things that I've kind of been trying to develop a little more over the last year. I haven't seen too many examples of this out in the world, of like creating musical themes in an improv way that's like in a not super obvious way. So for one of our new plays, there was it was kind of like a scarier show, and we had started it by playing kind of just scarier music. And we throughout the show had kind of come up upon like several things that we were like, all right, this character has, whenever we see this character on stage, like we bring forward these notes or whatever. But we had come up with this one theme that kind of went throughout the whole show, which was just a 4-note motif. That's the word that we use in composition, a motif, like you would see in like a play or something. And so we had this 4-note motif that was kind of like on its own. It's kind of eerie, and we would use it if something weird was happening, or if there was like a certain character doing a specific thing that they kept doing. We would bring this back to kind of solidify, not only in the audience's mind, but the improviser's mind, like, oh, this means, in a kind of like Pavlovian way, to like really connect those things together. And then we could, if there was nothing happening on stage, we could just go, and that would give a cue to someone to do something that was fell into that vein of what we were talking about before.
Yeah.
I remember you mentioning something after that show that I went over my head, but you would actually modulate those based on how normal our characters were, right?
Yeah, that's great that you brought that up. So these 4 notes don't mean anything. Like, it's like they're not in the same scale. They're not, but you can, like, when Julian was kind of playing like what's called like the straight man generally in this show, kind of, and
and
your character was kind of like the more normal one, and who had a more kind of sad backstory. And so we would recontextualize these notes by playing different chords with the same notes, which is kind of crazy that you can do that. So we had, which on its own, again, sounds kind of weird or creepy, but if we put this in the bass, Like, that's a totally different feeling than. And it's kind of like, but it allows us to be like, we have this motif that is going through the whole show, and but Julian's character, we could. We could not only had a new theme for Julian's character, but we were able to maintain some of the semblance of what we had created before, and also again, like when you have a character theme, you can cue if improvisers are listening, you can cue the character on stage. Like if we're doing a scene and there's like a lot of serious stuff going on. And the musicians have a hit that, oh, maybe Julian's character should come on stage. The improvisers will notice there's like a change, even if they can't quite place exactly what it is you're doing.
Right.
There's something that's shifting, and maybe they'll recognize that it's coming from the same place. I don't know.
And this weekend, we just Sebastian was playing for a bunch of students who were doing kind of a long form show in front of an audience for the first time. And It was amazing how much Sebastian could help them with the narrative of their show, because the things that they weren't super used to was like, what kind of at the top of a scene early on the show, like at what point should the villain come in? At what point should we jump back to this character that we've already seen? And what point? And Sebastian could like make it, especially for the villains who had like a that's a terrible demonstration.
Yeah, it was
but it was super different from everyone else, and so he could bring on the villains whenever he wanted to.
Yeah, and these kids who had never played with a musician before were still able to understand what I was doing, just because it's like. And I think a lot of auxiliary improvisers help with this too. That means like lighting improvisers and sound. If someone plays like a phone call sound halfway through a show, someone has to pick up the phone. Like,
yeah, we totally should do another episode or multiple episodes on other types of auxiliary improvisers. But I think the point that you mentioned can't be overstated, that there is something very intuitive to playing with a musical improviser and playing with a lighting improviser and the other kinds of improvisers that are able to give you hits, honestly, very similar sometimes in the way of just a normal stage improviser that you don't necessarily understand, but it still leads you to the right place. Like, I mean, I would say that many times a line was told to me on stage and I just kind of responded naturally. And then later I found out that the person was kind of trying to egg that response out of me, or that they already had that idea for where it was going. But I think the music is, if it does seem daunting at all, it is very intuitive. And as long as you like play together a lot, I think you will be able to transmit so much knowledge with just these sounds.
And it is about getting comfortable. There's a certain level of like, when you're playing with people that you haven't played with before, there's a certain level of like, oh, how well do they trust me? And because sometimes it, like, if I'm playing with a group I don't know and I start a scene and I'm like, and they're like, oh, Mom, I really miss you. Like, that's a totally different tone. And so sometimes there's a little bit of awkwardness, but in the same way that it would come from like someone walking in really angrily, and then someone else kind of like blocking that.
Right. Ears out.
Yeah. All right. Do we want to move into the genre part and talk about how genre can sort of be applied to themes and what we're doing with genre and improv?
Yes, please.
Or do you have any other big things you want to pack into the?
There's one more thing that I want to say that's really important, especially with a new play and less with Hero's Journey, and less with like if we're doing a format where we're singing, but in the Muprov world, and this is true with stage improvisers too, I'm sure, there's a really, really strong tool and it's like probably the most strong tool that a musician can use, and that's silence. And it's for a couple of reasons. If there's a scene that's happening, and with a new play, it's like unclear sometimes what was going on. If there's something going on and there's this dialogue happening that's kind of where the improvisers are really working on, you know, coming up with this realistic dialogue that's going on. Sometimes if I go in there with like it prescribes something that maybe wasn't there before. And sometimes that works, but also like I remember there was, and also we did duoprov, which was also Hal's ADing artistic direction, and that kind of had a similar feeling to me. Like there was a lot more waiting for improvisers to have beats of maybe there's silence on stage, and that's when the music comes in. But yeah, it's about maybe not prescribing something so that the scene could go kind of anywhere. But if I do that, then it kind of locks us into like, oh, we're in this kind of, it's like maybe melancholy world that maybe we weren't going to be before.
Yeah, I mean, this is one of the fundamental tensions that, I mean, I think Hal and I have of, yeah, you can go on stage and say, hello, Aunt Bertha, it's glad that I'm here for your retirement party, and I'm over like the beef that we had. And you know, establish exactly like what the world is in like one line.
Yeah.
Or yeah, leaving the room for subtlety, which I think is a little bit more in like the Muprov wheelhouse, but it's the exact same thing, just with the music.
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay.
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
We've been promising for a little while that we're going to have some like more concrete practice plans that you can attend to if you're a group and you want to start out. And I do think it's really important. There are certain things like, you know, auditioning musical improvisers that you want to do kind of before practicing, or, you know, as early as possible if you're listening to this. But you may have noticed in our last overview episode that we didn't have any concrete practice plan. And part of that is because the hero's journey in our own practice setting was one of the more talky formats, or there was a lot of information that we had to kind of learn and get on the same page about. And we actually spend a fair amount of our practice times doing like one person, maybe the director is at a whiteboard and they're explaining a lot of stuff conceptually, and then people get in circles and they give examples and stuff like that. So if you're entering into your first practice, honestly, the episode that we just did might be the first, you know, hour of your practice. It's like literally just a group conversation, trying to make sure that everyone understands kind of like baseline of where we're going, what these different stages are, and what to expect from the format. But for your kind of second half of that practice, if you've been sitting a lot, you probably want to do something that's like higher energy. And especially if you're a group that is new to this kind of longer improv, you might want to, you know, welcome everyone in and do something that you're a little more comfortable with. And we felt like one of the most accessible things into entering this is genre, because if you do short form, you probably already do genre. And so it's kind of a fun transition that will carry with you throughout the whole thing. And it's high energy and it's fun, and it's a good way to get people excited about starting something.
Yeah, and as we mentioned in the overview episode, I do think the genre plays pretty heavily into the hero's journey, at least as we've done it, and I think it can be very helpful. So yeah, we're going to do a bit of a deeper dive, and we have Sebastian here because hopefully you can connect the dots, but music is a very, very powerful way to convey genre and really enhances the experience. So we touched on this last time, but I think it would be good to just really quickly say, like, what role does genre play in improv? And yeah, we can zoom into the hero's journey specifically. Hal or Sebastian, I don't know if you have an answer, but to say as how it worked for us, we would pick the genre before we started the show. So we would go into each show knowing what genre it would be. And that, I think, is the only real way that like we made sure that genre played a role in the show.
I mean, like you guys said last week, sometimes format, all a format is a genre. Like we've done before too. Like we did film noir as a genre, and that was an entire format, and that involved coming up with like what are the tropes of this format, and it was a lot of work to kind of work on, you know, maybe even dialects that they would use then, and like story structures from how to append the genre on top of, you know, the usual narrative that we work with.
And
you have, or
so if we're trying to figure out like what tropes are in a genre, I think maybe let's introduce one of the first and most basic exercises that you should do with your troupe, which is what we would call the trope ball. If you're, let's just explain the concept of ball first in general, because I don't know that other improv groups do this. But when we talk about ball exercises, which I'm sure we will multiple times here on the podcast, the basic setup is that you stand in a circle and someone has, quote unquote, the ball. That person, without having an actual ball in their hand, just a space object one, will throw the ball to somebody else in the circle. And for all of these verbal ball games, you're going to say something. So it would all fall into a category. For example, this one is trope ball. So let's say as a troupe, you're trying to talk through what are the tropes of a sci-fi genre. Someone would have the ball, and then I'll say the name here just so that the audio listeners can figure out what's happening. But you would just throw the ball at someone and then say what you're going to say. So, for example, Hal, killer robots.
Killer robots. And I'm doing a catching hand gesture. And then so I repeat what Julian just said, partly because this allows you, especially if you're doing dialogue balls, to try playing in a way that's different from what you normally do. And also because that way your brain is not generating the cool thing that you're going to say. You're paying attention and catching killer robots. And then you throw it to someone else, like Sebastian, the Doomsday Machine.
The Doomsday Machine. And then you just keep going until either you get around the whole circle once, or you just keep going until
someone calls it. But the ball here is hopefully so that you can go in different orders, and I do think that the repeating what is thrown to you is a very important part of it, so that you're actually listening to what everybody else is saying. But yeah, this is pretty much just a verbal way for all of you to get a chance to think through some tropes of a genre, because that really is what we talk about when we're saying a genre is just a set of tropes, a set of things that might exist in this world.
And part of why I think genre holds such a big place in narrative improv is because it's, I think, kind of the easiest form of narrative improv. And I don't mean easy in like a detrimental way. I mean, like in terms of if you're practicing this thing, your show is more likely to have a high repeatable success rate if you're playing in a genre, especially if you're first starting out, because it puts everyone naturally into the kind of same page of the types of things that might happen, the expectations, and it reduces the burden of spontaneous creativity in some ways, because there are these kind of expectations of the types of things that might happen. That doesn't mean that it is the best way or that you have to play this way, but it definitely made sense for the first thing that we're doing to really fall into a genre, because it will support you and take care of you. But part of how we sync up and all get on the same page, I may never have seen a sci-fi movie. I may be the person in the circle who's like, what the heck? And so that's the person who the circle is most useful for, jogging your memory of like, what does happen in a horror film?
And with genre, I feel like in the hero's journey, sometimes you get kind of a split with, the ordinary world and then the new world. Sometimes that split is like, oh, the ordinary world is kind of like our world, and then they go into this genre world. But sometimes they're in the genre world and they go into an even, just like a newer world from there.
So
Yeah.
let's throw a micro ball. And when I say a micro ball, normally if we're throwing around a fantasy ball, we have 15 people in the group. Everyone might say two things. Like we'll throw it around for a while. But we don't really need to do that for you guys. So this is going to be a ball that rapidly transforms. It's kind of fun thing you can do where you can twist your hands and make a sound like and then say what the ball now does. So let's say every 3 of us, maybe it's going to switch genres, or maybe every 4 to 5, but switching fast.
Yeah.
Just so that viewers can kind of get a sense of the different kind of tropes that there might be in these different genres.
Yeah.
All right, I'm taking that sci-fi ball that we were throwing, and I am going to throw out, there's a big spaceship that can go really fast.
To who?
To Julian.
A big spaceship that can go really fast. Sebastian, an alien companion.
An alien companion. Hal, the Florpian sector.
The Florpian sector. Now this is a supernatural ball. Sebastian, werewolves.
Werewolves. Julian, the jungle men.
The jungle men. Hal, vampires.
Vampires. You're all in a weird old house, Julian.
You're all in a weird old house. I am now going to change this to fantasy ball. Sebastian, dragons.
Dragons. Hal, the very friendly griffin.
The very friendly griffin. There's like an ancient sword that has been crafted for generations, and it's the only thing that can kill the bad person, Sebastian.
The ancient sword that has been crafted for generations, and it's the only thing that can kill the bad person. I'm going to switch to film noir. Julian, an old detective's office.
An old detective's office. Hal, a cigar hanging out the mouth.
A cigar hanging out the mouth. Well, Sebastian, I think that everyone here would have to be talking with a transatlantic accent, don't you?
I do. Well, wouldn't you think that everyone had to be talking with a transatlantic accent? Julian, a mysterious murder on a boat.
Mysterious murder on a boat. I'm going to change it to a horror ball. Hal, there was a noise outside and we need to go investigate.
There was a noise outside and we need to go investigate. Sebastian, all the phone lines are down. There's no way to contact the outside world.
All the phone lines are down and there's no way to contact the outside world. Julian, there's something that I keep hearing, but I don't keep seeing.
There's something that I keep hearing, but I don't keep seeing. Sebastian, it would be unwise to go deeper into the forest, children. Come back home.
It would be unwise to keep going deeper into the forest, children. Come back home. Hal, there is an old book that I opened and it like screamed when I opened it.
There is an old book that I opened and it like screamed when I opened it. This ball has now transformed into a dialogue ball. It's a little bigger. And what this means is that when I'm going to be throwing this dialogue ball, I'm going to be saying a line of dialogue that might happen in the genre, which is magical. Oh, I don't know how I'd ever study for such a difficult magic exam, Sebastian.
Oh, I don't know how I would ever study for such a difficult magic exam. Julian, my spell book, it's been stolen.
My spell book, it's been stolen. Sebastian, the ancient rune that can send back Philibius to the dark world is in the castle.
The ancient rune that can send back Philibius to the dark world is in the castle. Hal, I just don't know how we're going to turn a zebra into a donkey by midnight.
Oh, I just don't know how we're gonna turn a zebra into a donkey by midnight. That transformed the ball into an animal-based ball. Think Zootopia or any Warrior Cats. You know what I mean? Well, you want to make noise outside my hibernating cave. You're gonna learn the hard way how to be quiet, Julian.
If you want to make noise outside my hibernating cave, you're going to learn the hard way to be quiet. Hal, if you want to be a New York street rat, you're going to have to learn how to get your own cheese, house rat.
If you want to be a New York street rat, you're gonna have to learn how to get your own cheese, house rat. So I just ate the ball, which concludes that exercise.
Yeah, I'm not. And one thing out of that I was noticing that is important about the whole ball thing is don't think very hard, or don't think at all, really. If you have the ball and you've said the thing that you are supposed to say from the person who just sent it, I advise just put your hand out in the way like you're throwing the ball and just start saying what comes next, because of like the big tropes for anything will always be hit by people who just know them. There's like with all the improv stuff, it's not so heavy what you say, and I think it's a lot of fun if sometimes you say something that's a little bit silly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So last episode we hit on kind of the genres that we did for the hero's journey. For example, we didn't do like a straight up horror show. We didn't do film noir because partly because we had just done those as other formats, but also because they kind of add in some extra layers of like, there's a detective and how is this all gonna work? Julian came up with 10 genres because we were doing 10 shows. Again, we kind of mentioned this last time, but like if you're new to this, maybe pick one genre. Or 3 genres or something like that you might really jam on, and let the audience choose from those. And we're going to give a little rundown on just like kind of which genres are easier, which ones have traps and stuff like that. And like right out the bat, I think the easiest genre is animal based, the one we were just doing, for the reason of it's like your show is just baseline going to be good, even if your narrative sucks and like everything about it sucks. If everyone is kind of realistically committing to playing animals, it's just going to be really, really enjoyable, and everyone's going to have a good time. I'm not saying this is the deepest one or like the most rewarding one, but I do think it's the easiest. And if you want to do this, there are a lot of things you can practice doing. Like there's a game called Animal Party where you have everyone be given an animal and just try to play a person who's subtly influenced by that animal. And you can kind of ramp that up in terms of how influenced you want. Maybe you want it to be someone who you wouldn't even know, or maybe it's someone who like it's mandibles instead of, but just practicing playing with animal physicality and getting in a group and seeing what each other are doing and how to, I've picked an animal in groups before, like, okay, everyone's going to learn how to do chicken. We all exchange our best chicken stuff and just get on that. So, with each genre, you're going to want to come up with a set of exercises that's helpful for that specific genre. If you choose to only run, we're not going to give you exercises for every single genre. But if you want to know for a specific genre, you can ask us in the question of the week, which is currently empty. So you'll get it for sure.
Yeah. And I think if you are looking for exercises for a genre, just watch some movie or TV show, or just read the freaking Wikipedia for it. And then like a very basic exercise that we do a lot, and I think that could be helpful to add into your repertoire, is to start a scene with the premise of some part from that, like TV show or movie or whatever. So if you really are struggling, like what even happens in a magical movie? Yeah, I don't know. Look up the synopsis for Harry Potter or whatever. And I mean, I haven't watched it, but you know, you can have them be in the potions class, and then see what comes of that.
Another thing that I love is the website tvtropes.com.
Yes.
Or whatever. And they have not only just like thousands and thousands of TV tropes or movies and TV and media tropes, but also like you can look up a piece of media and then in there is like all the tropes that are used in that piece of media, which is super cool. So
I think the next easiest genres for me, and you guys can dispute this, are the magical fantasy. Were both like, I felt like pretty reliable at turning out stuff that didn't get too complicated and that also was just like fun for the audience to watch.
Mhm.
And then in the next kind of category, I would put supernatural and sci-fi as these things that like sometimes they can get a little too complicated. You can get really down in the weeds about how this, weird machine works and lose track of the ball, but they still kind of provide pretty reliable stuff.
Yeah, I think that's a relatively accurate thing. I think as with all of these, your troupe might have a easier or harder time with some of them. So I think that you should try the different ones out and see what you like more.
And we also did have one of our hero's journey was just modern. It was in the modern day, totally normal world. And you would travel from like, maybe you started out in, Ohio and then went to the big city or something like that. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that it would be fun if we introduce some more music back into this world. For all
Sure.
down.
I know how you had another game idea.
Yes. So one of the types of balls that we throw around is one person says a line and then the other person has to catch that line in the genre. So you can say something that is like, I packed myself a little box of lunch. I made a sandwich with a lot of mayonnaise and tuna fish. And now I'm going to bring that to my job at the post office. Sebastian, animal based.
I'm so excited. I found so many grubs today and I put them into my package for later, and I'm going to be going to the watering hole to send my news.
Nice. You get the idea. Let's try doing this like 1 or 2 times with a couple of different genres, and then we're going to get into the musical side of this game.
Yeah.
So let's just set the genre to sci-fi. I feel like that's pretty simple.
Yeah.
Cool. So we're going to be throwing lines that aren't sci-fi and catching them in sci-fi.
All right. I'll throw to Hal. What I don't really realize usually is that like 5 drinks is too much. I think you should maybe have 3 drinks if you're really trying to have fun, but 5 is definitely too much for a night out.
4 shots of creme brulee. My God, you're going to be steaming out your ears. All right. This is to Sebastian. This ancient sword has been passed down in our family. You must use it to slay the Vikings.
The power glaive is the truest item in the entire galaxy. You must use it to destroy the Draxilons. Julian, I just didn't feel like taking a shower today. That's all.
My receptors didn't give me any indication of excess dirt buildup on my dermis layer, and so I decided to not do the cleansing process. Sebastian, why weren't you there last night? Everybody was laughing at me at the talent show.
Mark, you didn't come to crew meeting yesterday. Everyone was being so rude. They were making fun of my receptors. Hal, there's really nothing more that I love than just a warm cup of tea and sitting by the fire with a book.
Okay, I'm going to take that one. There's really just nothing more than I love than a warm cup of tea and sitting with a book. And we're going to transfer into the musical game. So this is the line that's going to be the line. I hope you guys got that. There's really nothing more than I love than just sitting with this warm cup of tea by the fire with a book. This is going to transfer through a lot of different genres. But how we're going to figure out what genre we're in is Sebastian. So you clock that line. Sebastian's going to play something, and based on what Sebastian plays, we have a list of the genres that we were using. I am going to transfer that line and toss it to Julian. And then Julian is going to try to catch both what genre he thinks Sebastian was trying to communicate and what genre he thinks I was trying to communicate, and whether or not I got it right. And then Sebastian will answer. So again, the line is, there's nothing better than...
There's nothing more that I love than sitting by the fire with a cup of tea and a book.
Okay, cool. Well, G47, as you know, I'm programming you to remember that my preferences are for the screen to display a fire, for my liquid to be warm to hot temperature, and for my tablet to display all sorts of ancient readings from the human times. Julian.
I'm going to catch sci-fi and sci-fi. I think both of you were doing sci-fi. And I hope I'm right. Am I right?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes.
All right, Julian, you're gonna throw one of those back to me, but with a different genre.
The same sentiment.
Same sentence. We're still stuck on this tea in the book.
Squire, I must tell you that in preparing my beautiful office for the next hours and days, please prepare me the most lumbersome of fires from the Troglodytean woods. Alack, bring me as well a cup of the finest, most brewed tea that any tavern has.
Okay, I think Julian was throwing fantasy, and this could be wrong, but my first guess before Julian started speaking was superhero, which I think is wrong, but I'm going to just be open about that. That was my first thought.
Hal is correct.
Oh.
Scoring points.
But also, it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. That's true.
Yeah.
Well, I think in this case, maybe it mattered a little.
Because you won.
All right. Let's do another one. Well, I'm so glad you came out of the storm out there into my lovely manor, but you see, there's nothing I love more than warming myself in front of the fire with a piping hot cup of tea and the books.
Okay. I think Hal, you were either doing horror or supernatural, but I'm going to say horror. And I think Sebastian, you were doing noir.
I was doing something else.
What were you doing?
I was doing, this was a little bit more of a challenge, but I was doing abstract.
Oh. We haven't mentioned abstract to the viewers. My favorite genre. This one's the hardest one to pin down. Probably the hardest genre out there in terms of like getting on the same page, but it's super fun. Julian, do you want to explain abstract for Sebastian?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's tough. The concept is that it's probably going to be something that's a little bit trippy, a little bit mind-bending. Sometimes what abstract can be is like it's a story about some like concept or like abstraction. So for example, Inside Out, the Pixar movie, is like a story about emotions, and that's like not really, it doesn't really fall into any other genre. It's more of like an abstraction. But I think that abstract as a genre that we've done has some other legs in terms of it might also just be about like a kind of heady concept or like a concept that doesn't fit into any of the other genres. The abstract show that we did was very strange. And it wasn't one where I would say it was about like an abstraction of some concept or like a personification of some concept. It was about like an experimenter who like an experiment is being done on them. It was maybe it described as like similar to the Truman Show. So yeah, you have to figure out with your troupe what you mean when you talk about this genre, but yeah, kind of trippy. heady.
We've we did complicated stuff too a little bit at one point. There was like a show where everything was like you had to like build everything in the world, and like there were like lampposts that were like everything was kind of alive, and like there was like a resource that was like built up everything.
Yeah, kind of like Lego movies.
Yeah, exactly.
Put that one on as a master builder. Yeah, okay, but I was going for supernatural. So Julian, your first instinct was right, but your second instinct was. But like, Sebastian, can you just show us real fast what would you do for supernatural? And Julian, what was your final guess again? Was it Shakespeare?
I thought you were doing either supernatural or horror, and that Sebastian was doing noir. So
Sebastian, can you show us what you would do for supernatural and what you would do for noir? Like, obviously, you might do different things every show, but kind of like.
Which one was that?
Supernatural.
Yes. And then for a film noir, I would play something like. You know.
Okay. Yeah. We've hit on most of them, but Julian, for fairness, you wanna throw one more back at me, and then
I've got a couple more in my book.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
I do desire the feeling that I do feel upon sitting on a chair and relaxing with the fire that does bring me lots of joy and heat. Oh, and Madame John Vadil's tea.
Okay. I think Julian was doing just some sort of Shakespearean thing. That sounded like when I used to queue up like a Hearthstone game. That sounded like I was playing. So I'm slightly more on the fantasy. Well, I'll go with I'll trust Julian. I'll go with Shakespeare.
As you should.
Yes. All right. That's a great way to end. Trust your partner. Okay. We're getting near the end of what we're trying to do. So let's wrap this into the other exercises that are fun to practice genre. And what we were just doing was taking one line and transforming it into genre, but you can do that with a whole scene. And there's a pretty common short form game that does that called genre Rashomon. And this is a great exercise that's just going to be fun right away. Of you do a scene and then someone picks a genre and you have to redo the whole scene in that genre. And it's a good way to cue up what is genre and what is different. And for the musical improviser, you can do the same thing with a theme, right, Sebastian?
Mm-hmm.
How does that work?
Yeah, so it's like if I bring back my theme and it's like I have a theme that's like and I want to come up with like my so give me a genre that I can put that theme into.
Magical.
So if I'm doing magical, I can go like and now give me another one.
Horror.
Yep.
Yeah. That's great. So if I'm doing horror, then I can do. Right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Can we do superhero?
Yeah. This is a good one.
Julian, are you studying?
Rising.
Yeah.
And after you play some genre Rashomon, where you're doing a scene, you can repeat the same scene in 3 different genres. if you have a big group, you can have one group do the scene and then another group of 3 come in and do the same scene if you want to get more people different playing time. But there are some other of these kind of short form genre games. Julian, you want to talk through some of them? I know you were saying they were a little
Yeah, no, I'll talk
sometimes.
to. There's 2 that I think are sisters to genre Rashomon, which I would call genre zones, in which you divide the actual physical like playing space, the stage, into 3 different zones. And while you are in a specific zone, you do it in a certain genre. So you'll get 3 genres at the top, and then you're always in a genre, but the genre that you're in is dependent on which zone you're in. The other one is genre roller coaster, where you are going through a scene which could start with a genre or more likely would just start normal. And then prior, somebody else who will be like calling the scene, like got a list of genres, and then they will call out at different times in the scene for the scene to change genres into one of these other ones. So it'll be a roller coaster and you're changing genres throughout the scene. These are all good to just get familiar with playing with genre. We have more exercises that we're going to talk about, but I just want to give a note on these ones before we move on, which is if you've played these before, which these are pretty popular games, I would not be surprised. There is a slight difference between the way that you might be playing genre in these scenes, or that you've seen people play genre in these scenes, and the way that you're going to want to get used to playing genre for the hero's journey, or generally if you're doing any Muprov. The way that I've seen these kind of games get played, which is very fun and is often very entertaining for the audience, is a lot of quick references to like obvious touchstones from the genre. So if it's a sci-fi scene, immediately like we're going to have both robots, aliens, someone is going to take off their space helmet, and like you're just going to load in all of these things at once. And that can detract, I think, from having a scene that feels grounded, or having a scene with characters that you can actually like follow. If they're like every line just kind of trying to spout out like a stereotype or a trope from the genre, it's going to get tough. So try, I think Animal Party that Hal mentioned is like a good thing to think about when doing these scenes, is like, how would you do this genre at 100%? How would you do it at like 50%? How would you do it at 25%? And try modulating that. And as a reference, I mean, you can just look at any sort of movie or TV show in a genre. And that's usually the level that in Muprov stuff we're trying to achieve. But yeah, just think about how hard you're doing the genres. And if you're getting confused off of what we're saying based on your experience with genre and previous improv settings, consider this slider.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is mainly, your first practice. You're probably trying to get people on board to doing this type of improv. This is like a very fun sort of intro level thing that they'll probably already like.
Yeah,
which is a good thing about it. It's high energy. It might not be the perfect thing for teaching you how to operate groundedly within this, but we're going to get into that in our next episode about the ordinary world. You're going to get a lot of grounded stuff thrown at you. So just getting people baseline excited to be playing in this type of way is a good first step.
Yeah.
Julian, you have another one that we should have done earlier in the show. I mean, not in the show, but like probably in your practice. This is if you're ramping up the intensity. Yeah,
this is a good one. It's similar to the genre ball concept, but basically all of you will stand in a circle, or some subset of you, and you get a genre. So you might have gotten like fantasy or something, and then each of you goes in and just like space object with your hands, you endow something that's in this genre, in this environment, but within the genre. So if we start out and it is let's say it is like fantasy. The first thing you go in, you might just put a sword on a table, and then someone else might fill this out and put like a dragon's head on the wall, and so on and so forth. And then you build up this one environment that might exist in the fantasy world. And then you could even do a scene in that environment if you want, but mostly it's just helpful to thinking, I guess, like physically about what these genres will look like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you can also do this with an outfit. You can have one improviser get up and everyone be like, endow one piece of their outfit. Like you're wearing a helmet that's been carved by a dwarf, and you're wearing a belt that has your family crest on it or whatever. And, you know, your cape is really heavy, and have them take on those things and then enter into a scene as the character who's just been endowed by their outfit.
Yeah. And these are some good exercises. And we can post more detailed descriptions. If you're interested, please ask us. And you can obviously modulate all of these depending on what works for your troupe. And there's also many other genre exercises that you would probably be able to find by just searching genre game improv or genre exercise improv.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I think that like, again, if your our practices are 2 hours. So if the first kind of half of the practice is spent talking through what to expect from the hero's journey, the second half is spent with like a couple balls of like getting people up and involved. And then the end bit is spent doing some scenes. Like, that's a pretty reasonable, I think, opening to a hero's journey.
Yeah. And I think that it would be good, as it seems like we're wrapping up pretty soon. A final thing for all three of us to just go around and talk about a time in improv where we found genre very delightful, or where we were just intrigued and made happy by the genre. I'll talk about one first, which was during we did a fantasy show in our run of Hero's Journey shows, and that was a really delightful one for me, because fantasy shows often involve like kind of monsters or creatures that, like, you know, there are some that you obviously know, like goblins or orcs or whatever, but you can kind of just be a general purpose monster. And I got to play multiple characters, but one of my characters I got to play was this little mud monster that existed. And it was just something that happened for a scene, but I think that's just a setting that I really like, and getting to play a mud monster who loved to chuck around mud and was just being a little bit of a nuisance to the hero was a very delightful moment for me.
I think mine came in, just what first came up for me. I was just thinking about, we did a run of musicals, and one of the musicals, though we didn't prescribe genre the same way, often they gained them. And my favorite one was we did a musical, and the suggestion was haunted house. And it was like, even though it was a musical and it was very fun, there was still like, because we had this kind of haunted house thing going, the energy was kind of leaning towards a more horror genre with the music and also with the players. And they were doing more serious stuff, and like it was really kind of, there was some really dark, scary stuff that was, I just think, very cool, that kind of just came out.
Yeah, I'll hit as a sneak peek for a couple months from now when we do Shakespeare. I think that one of my favorite genre pieces is when genres have narrative tropes, and that kind of gets into the slasher thing as well, of like the tropes of the slasher genre is that people get killed off as it goes. And my favorite narrative trope to play with is one person is hiding in a room and two other people come in and have a conversation that the hiding person hears. That's a Shakespeare trope that affects the plot a lot in really goofy ways. And I think that's my favorite genre trope that affects the plot. All right. We got anything else we want to cover in this episode? We've already run over time a little bit, so...
Yeah, we've run over time. I'll throw in one more thing. I mean, there's two more things. One that we definitely have to do, but the one is when you're soliciting genre, one trick that I've heard is don't ask people to give a genre in the audience. Ask people what their favorite show is, and then pick a favorite show and then get the genre from there. Because when you ask genre, I think people get a little bit, I don't know, there's just like a few that they'll often say. But if you just ask people what their favorite show or movie is, then I think you'll get like a more fun spread of genres.
Yeah. And there are also the genres we kind of have been picking and mentioning are tailored more for the hero's journey. Like we didn't really mention like rom-com, or which we've done like Hallmark movie or sitcom or stuff like that, which might involve a physical journey, but are kind of less likely to, like, you could do The Simpsons, the movie, or whatever, you know, and he does go on a big journey to like Alaska. So you totally could do a journey in the sitcom genre or the rom-com genre, you would just have to like wield it into the journey of like, okay, I'm going to meet this person and then we're going to get romantically caught up on a journey, like we're both on the same plane somewhere or something like that. And for noir, Shakespeare, and horror, like we've talked about them today, but we wouldn't recommend doing those as your hero's journey, because Shakespeare has its own plot structure. Horror kind of has its own plot structure too, and so does noir. And just keep it to the things that are naturally lending themselves to be in the form of a hero's journey and physical motion.
And the last thing we got to do before our sign off, of course, is give a big, hearty, lovely, smoochy, lovely thank you to Sebastian for being on today's episode. It was very wonderful. As an audio format, it is wonderful to have a musician on, and we very much appreciate you.
Well, thank you. And if you have any questions about music or musical improv at all, send them an email, and I'm sure they'd be happy to put me in touch with you. I'd be happy to answer anything.
Anything you want to shout out or nah?
Nah. You can listen to See Me Now on Spotify.
Yes, please do.
This has been
Muprov Musings.
All right. My sign off is Sebastian Relevant, which I've already mentioned this to Julian, but last Monday, we ran a version of The Last 5 Years, which is a format that we had done not as a musical. And we ran it as a musical. Turns out that Sebastian has studied Jason Robert Brown, who is the composer of the musical The Last 5 Years, and could play in his style. And for people who aren't familiar with the plot structure, this is a show that is telling a love story out of order. And you are seeing it from the perspective of one member of the couple going forward in time, while you're also seeing it from the perspective of the other member of the couple going backwards in time. And so this first scene of the show is the last scene of the love story right after the breakup. And the second scene of the show is the first scene of right before they meet each other. And the third scene of the show is the third to last scene. And the fourth scene of the show is the third scene of the story. And that keeps on going. And eventually they cross so that the second to last scene of the show is the second scene of the story, and the last scene of the show is the 13th scene of the story. Gosh, that might sound complicated. It's a nutty format, really difficult. But on our first try running this thing, it went crazy well, and there's a video of it. I was hype about it. I wanted to share it. Put the link in.
That sounds fun. Yeah, you've studied Jason Robert Brown, and that's his name?
Yeah, Jason Robert Brown. I am a musical theater composer by trade. And so obviously I love listening to musicals and learning about what the composers do. And so it was like, I'm writing this musical right now, and I've been just listening to so much Jason Robert Brown, who's the writer, and just like there's so many specific things that he does that I was like, this is useless information. And then Hal was like, let's do this thing. I was like, oh my God. And so it's like, it's the equivalent of being an impressionist or whatever, like doing, doing a really good, like whatever, Obama impression.
Mm-hmm.
Can you do a Jason Robert Brown impression on your piano for us?
Let's see. So there's a couple of things he does. He does these vamps, which is like a repeated section, and it's like, it's very much like and the bass, my left hand is like moving around a lot while my right hand doesn't. And then he does this other thing that's and he has these kind of like weird upper extension things like
That's awesome. And if you want to hear more of that, we're going to put the link to that video on. It works really well on video, which most improv doesn't, because Sebastian's playing the whole time and it just sounds awesome. So it's covering for, anything that might happen in the show. You're going to just enjoy hearing the concert.
Great, yeah. And if you want to hear the Obama impression that Sebastian is talking about, that'll be in the description as well. We did a show about Obama. And
Thanks,
yeah,
Julian.
thank you all for listening to Muprov Musings.
Like you did back then. See me now. I should thought you cared. All these times they're changing. Oh, and my mind is rearranging. Can't you see me now? Like you always did. Can't you see me now? I just wanna be with you. When the times they seem so crazy, can't you see me now? Can't you see me now? I remember way back when, oh, and times they are changing, you know, things are rearranging. Can't you see me now? Can't you see me now? Everything is changing. Can't you see me now? Can't you see me